Okay, so today this is more of an educational video. So I usually ask my students to send me questions about life or school or whatever, things like that. And so these are kind of frequently asked questions or just the ones that are on people's mind right now. So let me switch over screens so you'll see me going back and forth, but you won't see what I'm looking at. So one of the questions that came up, let's see. Do. So one of the questions was, who really deserves to get full grades, or what should be done in order to get full grades or for success in work? And then also, are our goals true, or is it just an illusion? So the answer, I guess, my interpretation of that, basically, full grades should go to people who complete all the required work effectively. That being said, grades are also contextualized. So sometimes, as professors, we have to calibrate to the group or to the type of assignment or to our expectations and all that fun stuff. So, more importantly, if we focus on the grades, if you're a student and you focus on the grades, you're usually focusing on the wrong thing. If you focus on learning, good grades happen. But if you focus on grades, sometimes neither happens. And so if you're learning, you're growing, you're adding value to yourself, and the grades are just a way of documenting that you did that. There are a lot of reasons why someone might not have great grades. But the important thing is if they're learning and they're growing, maybe their grades, I know a lot of people where it's the expectation of what counts as a good grade or full grades. And it's like, there's a reason C is passing. And so C is sufficient. Like, it's not wrong to have a C in a class if that class is if a C is a passing grade. Now, depending on your long-term goals or your degree plan or something like that, then you've got something to think about because there are some requirements that a certain program might have, like a B in this type of class or the ability to pass a certain test. So you still may grow, but your grades are an indicator of how much growth is happening. The same way if you're weight training, the amount of reps or the amount of weight you're doing or the endurance you have or how long you can do cardio or whatever it is, all those are the grades are just the numbers to acknowledge how much growth is happening or how much learning is happening. But you don't, and so it can be good to kind of have that in mind. But if you focus on learning, you're going to grow. So that's the most important thing. And then that second question, are our goals like meaningful or true, or are they just an illusion? And so really, this is kind of like there's goals and there's dreams, right? The illusion is the dream, but goals are visions of the future that we want for ourselves. So that vision, if we're working toward it, that vision can shift along the way as we discover who we are and what we want more clearly. But goals only become illusions or dreams if we're not actively taking steps to accomplish them. So sometimes but it's kind of interesting. Sometimes, just like fiction, when we're telling stories, when we're watching a movie, the illusion can be very powerful and almost as powerful as reality because we let it in. We suspend disbelief for a moment and say, I'm going to try and set this goal. And maybe I can't make it, but maybe I can. And what happens if I can? Maybe I'll discover something I'm more capable of than I thought I was. So we never want to discount a goal or even just a dream of something. We do want to try and make steps toward it if we really want it. The things we put our energy to, if we're being intentional about our time and energy, the things we put our time and energy into are going to be the things we feed are the things that are going to grow. So, a dream's just in our imagination until we put feet to it, till we put some energy into it, till we invest in it. So those are two questions that have come up. We're going to keep going. Let's see, what else do we have? Got to scroll back through my student text messages. Let's see. Ooh, okay, let's see. So these are solid ones. What's the most important thing in life, or what are the most important things in life to me? And what's the most difficult part about life? So what's the most important thing in life to me? So that's a big question, right? And it's really easy to get like a standard textbook answer. I will say that I prioritize some important things, and I don't always do it perfectly, but I try and anchor to core values. Like for me, like one of the most important, like I've got my relationships and I've got my personal growth. Like those are the two big things. And my relationships are kind of vertical and what I call vertical and horizontal. So my horizontal relationships are, I care very deeply about my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, my trying to build relationships and maintain relationships with family and friends, and coworkers and students. Like those all matter to me very much in kind of concentric circles. And then those are the horizontal ones. And then my relationship, something that is important that not everybody knows, is like I like Jesus. I think he's cool. I've read the Bible over a dozen times. So my relationship with God is a big thing for me. And so I regularly pray. I regularly serve at my church. I like worship and guitar and all that fun stuff. And those are new things for me. And this is my daughter. She's over here. She's walking in my office. I'm just doing a live stream answering questions that students sent me. You're welcome to sit there. So she's in the room. I may have her chime in a minute. But if you ask me what's important to me, it's the vertical relationship, the horizontal relationships, and then my own personal growth, which is why you'll see, like sometimes if people see me in the halls or on campus or anywhere, sometimes it looks like I'm running around with my head cut off. And that's just because I'm constantly in a state of growth and trying new things and experimenting. And sometimes that's stressful, but not in a bad way. It's me being active and moving and trying to put energy into stuff is, even if it's a little frenetic, that's just part of having ADHD. So my personal growth, it's like, for me, the bar is set really low. If you don't know a lot about my past, once I made it through high school with the high school diploma, without having, gotten into drugs or alcohol or had some kids, at at an age where I might not have been able to take care of them, I kind of surpassed the bar of my family, in a good way. Like I tell my mom, like she did a great job as a single mom, slingshotting us forward. And so, when the bar is that low, it's either you can just stay there and be like, yay, my life's good, which is true. Or you can go, what else can I do? And so, kind of Encanto style, Mirabelle, what else can I do? Actually, it's her sister who sings that technically. And so I really like that. But so I like that idea. And so, as I'm led, I will go. I got a master's and a bachelor. I got a bachelor's, then a master's, then a PhD. I wrote a textbook. I get stuff published. I write book reviews. I try and continually grow personally, in character. And I struggle and I fail just like everybody else. But I try and be really reflective. So those are things that are most important to me. And then there's a second question: what's the most difficult part about life? Post-COVID, relationships, friendship, especially in Arizona. And Arizona has this interesting culture where, and I looked up I did some data diving on like movement patterns, relationship patterns, but sometimes it's just hard to make friends. And I think I'm coming and my family's coming into a new season, but it's hard to kind of maintain friendships. That's probably the hardest part about life. It's so easy. And this is me as I get close, like I'm almost 40, I'm 39. So as I get closer and closer to 40, and there's part of it that's like, I don't have the same level of extended family that some people do. Some people have a bunch of aunts and uncles still alive and grandparents and that sort of thing. And mine just aren't in the picture for a variety of reasons. And same thing on my wife's side, though we have a couple people, it's just like a third of what most people have at best. But as I become an older man, there's some demographic challenges that as we get older, it's really easy to isolate, to just be comfortable in the life we have and not necessarily try and reach out just to build friendships or reach out to be a mentor as we age. So that's one of the most challenging things, is trying to connect with other people and build those relationships. But it's something I'm trying to invest in and something that I've struggled with and I'm actively trying to get better at. And I've really appreciated people over the last couple of years who have helped me grow in that area. Even if it means calling me out on stuff that like, that wasn't a good friend thing to do, or that hurt my feelings, or, whatever way they happen to say it. So those are those two questions from that student. Let's see. What else is next? Doop. So my first question, so this student says, my first question about school or life would be, how do you not feel drained throughout the week? I have school during the week, and then I also am a full-time mom, so it definitely is difficult to have me time. My second question would be, what is a book you'd recommend to read? I am in this weird reading phase, and I can't stop reading. So for this student, yes. Well, admittedly, I don't know if I'm a great example of this as far as like feeling drained. Like for instance, my energy level is way different than most people's for some reason. So like I sleep 5 or 6 hours a night. I'm constantly fidgety. There's a benefit and a detriment to having ADHD and being as bouncy as I am. But like, and I'm also very social. So for me, it's like I get energized by hanging out with other people, by doing things together. And so I don't know that I'm a great example. I do get tired. Like yesterday, yesterday, if you are paying attention to my YouTube channel, the evening had a D&D club stream. So the D&D club lasted from about 5 to 9 with like setup and breakdown. Though for me, I also taught, my classes started at 8:05. I usually try and get there 15 or 20 minutes early because I brew coffee, and then I usually have to pack up and stay late. In addition, yesterday I set up sound for voice recordings for the teaching so that we could better serve students by having recordings of some of those classes. And then I also set up the audio for the D&D streams and the video for the D&D streams. So that combined, and then I put it on myself because I'm like this is I prepped a roast to make for the D&D club for dinner, so that we would have something other than pizza like we'd been getting. And so I did that and added that to my morning routine, my evening routine, morning routine, and then in between. So we used an Instant Pot and made a roast between my teaching and the actual club time. So that was a busy day. And it's also why if you texted me yesterday as a student, I didn't get back to you. I'm doing it now. But all that to say is sometimes it's a matter of perception, and then sometimes it's recognizing physical limits. I worked full time to provide for my family while I got an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's. It helps that I don't sleep as much as other people, but I do sleep deeply. So for people who are sleep experts, yes, I'm trying, but it's just my brain wakes me up. If I go to bed at 10, I wake up at 4:30. If I go to bed at midnight, I wake up at 6. That's how it works. No alarms anymore. So I did 9 years construction that sets my morning. I'm spacing a little bit. One sec. So more to the point, there are days that I remember this student said she's a mom with a kid. I've seen my mom work 18-hour days, and that's hard. Like growing up, that was something that was a good example, and also like made me want to be a good husband and be a good father and definitely make sure my wife wasn't having to hold the bag for the kids. So it wasn't uncommon in our house for me to be reading a book and holding a baby, or typing an essay with one hand while holding a baby, or getting a baby Bjorn on my back or my front, and or the cheaper version, and washing dishes, and that sort of thing. Like that was a common thing. I also had to find better ways to use my time. So one of the ways I made it through grad school was I got used to doing voice text to speech, using that accessibility technology and listening to research. So sometimes it's how do you not get so tired and get burnout? Also, how do you make your time more efficient? So times when my brain didn't need to function, but it was a mundane task that was like tacit knowledge or like embedded knowledge that I had internalized. Doing the dishes doesn't take a lot of thought work. Showering is something, my brain doesn't need to think, it doesn't need to focus on. You just kind of do it mostly. So I will have research in my discipline, or I did. I do it less now. I listen to podcasts and other fun things now. But when I was, ankle deep, knee deep, barely not drowning in the PhD program, like that was how I found time, is all the downtime, mundane task, travel time I maximized by using my time more efficiently and finding ways that my body could do the thing because it was so used to it, driving, and not supporting distracted driving, but like where, I can drive and have a conversation, or I can drive and listen to something, kind of passively taking in information fairly easily, So maximizing that time, doing laundry, doing dishes, showering, and having research come in, or readings come in, or learning come in. Those types of things. So those are some of the things I do, and it did make it easier to do all the things with supportive family and friends. And when it hasn't been there for me and my wife, it's been really hard. When it has been there, it's been amazing. And so without so if you don't have that kind of social structure, it really is. There's this educational philosophy or principle called Vygotsky's zones of proximal development. Basically, here's what you can do. Here's what you can do with good friends. Here's what you can do with other supports. And in education, it's like tutors and professors that support you and that kind of thing. And so if you've got a solid social structure around you, support system around you, you can do so much more. Having grandparents that are willing to babysit that you trust and all that, or not, but still babysitters, friends, family, being part of a church group where where some of the youth are like, sure, I'll babysit for you guys for a couple hours. That kind of thing has been a lifesaver sometimes. So yeah, that's some of the ways I do it. What was the other question? What's a book I would recommend? I'm in this weird reading phase, this student says. Okay, and I'm going to ask this student directly, but the first question is, what books are you into right now? Because, my favorite book in sixth grade was Oliver Twist, Jane Eyre, like British literature style stuff. But I've also read Lord of the Rings 7 times before I was 13. And lately I've been reading a lot of epic fantasy and Brandon Sanderson, and some other things as well. So I have a full spectrum of reading interests. So that's a question you have to kind of dig into and see what people like, and try and help them find. I will say there are a couple good things. If you go to Goodreads, or if you use, oh gosh, what's the app my younger sister just told me about? So we use Storygraph or Goodreads. Both have a lot of here's what people say about this type of book. And so you can kind of start looking at kind of avatars or user profiles that are similar to yours. If this book is, like Brandon Sanderson often is considered, it's epic fantasy. So there's a slow burn, right? It builds slowly. It's not always right into the action. So you kind of have to there's a patience to reading that genre that I really like, because I like the big world. But there's also if it's like there are some people who really like Tolkien, or some people who really like C.S. Lewis, but not usually both. So things like that. So that's a more targeted question, but you can look at Goodreads and see what, it's good to check reviews, or, honestly, you can go and say, for people who like this book, that's not a bad GPT question, actually. Hey, I like this book. What are books that are like it? Sometimes I do that. And for those of you who don't know, I'm not against GPT. I think it's a wonderful tool, but it should never be used in a situation where what you're doing is supposed to represent your learning, because you don't learn by having GPT produce it for you. There are brain functions in the process of production that you learn. So that's one of the big things with GPT. If you are, say, like me, I will use it when I'm running a D&D session, or when I'm trying to get kind of a quick response to kind of help me think through something or brainstorm. You're not on anything that I'm paid for, and not on anything that I'm paid for the originality of it, and not on anything that I am that I'm supposed to be, that it would be professionally undercutting, that kind of thing. So I'm real careful how I use it. But like a D&D session where I'm like, I don't want to build all the stat blocks for a monster or whatever when I'm running a game, or I'm trying to brainstorm and think of some examples. Or if I'm trying to, I have this content and I can have GPT build a bullet list of it for me, I'll do that. I'll create tables of mythological creatures with basic definitions, and then I'll go and make sure it's right. That's part of the reason, if I have the expertise, I can check it. When people don't have the expertise, they don't check it. And that's part of the problem with that. I got off on a tangent there. So moving forward, next questions. Actually, let me ask that student that question and type it in real fast. So actually, I'll come back. I got to post this anyway. So picture, so this is from the linguistics side of a class. Why is numeric a part of English when it's numbers? Which aspects of linguistics is the most important or challenging? All right, so this is coming from one of my writing classes. I've got the 8 aspects of writing, and we were learning about the linguistic aspect of writing and writing systems. So there's a blend here. So technically, And so this could be a miscommunication or it could be a misunderstanding. So the miscommunication could be they meant writing and said English. That would be miscommunication. So if they meant what does the numeric writing system have to do with an English class, but they meant writing, well, numbers are a form of communication in written form. And so in my writing class, we study writing systems to understand the various ways that we can encode information. And you can go watch that playlist on the linguistic aspect because that's part of it. The other side of it is potentially a misunderstanding of the course. So technically, ENG 101 traditionally would have been called an English course. And some of the history of that is that it goes back to like English or British literature kind of stuff, or English language literature. These days, and probably for the last 50, 60, 70 years, the English 101 course isn't English. It's called first year composition, at least, especially at my school. First year composition is a different subject than just English, right? When I'm teaching writing, those principles are broadly applicable to a variety of languages. So when I teach writing, I'm not just teaching English, but there's a miscommunication because a lot of high school classes use English language or English literature, or they just call it my English class. And so that's kind of a misnomer because I'm not teaching you English and about the English language. And if you want to know a little more about that, go look up my video on grammar and grammar norms and all that, or redefining grammar, and it explains a little more. But the college environment in the US, and with the ENG tag in front of it, kind of presumes that there is an English oriented expectation to the class, but there doesn't have to be. And the class is bigger than just one language. So that's why, for instance, today in class and yesterday in my learning communities, we talked about how math is a language, and we used linguistic principles to connect to that language and better understanding how to communicate in that language rather than just traditional English. And so using numerical symbols to communicate is a great alternate way, especially if it encodes the information better for the reader or the audience. So let me make sure I didn't butcher that question. So why is numeric a part of English? Because numbers are a way of encoding information, and sometimes how you use numbers can drive home a point better. There is a difference between alphabetically writing out numbers and using a numeric system. One time in my chemistry and writing learning community, we did this exercise because to explain why scientific notation is such a good thing. Because if you don't have scientific notation and you don't have a numeric writing system, both are bad. Try writing out 1,247,363 in alphabetic text. And tell me how that makes you feel. And then do that for 1,000,000,000,000 or bigger. You get the idea. It's a lot. So these writing systems are meant to enhance and maximize communication and efficiency. So fun stuff. So that's the answer to that question. The second question was, which aspect of linguistics is the most important or challenging? And just for the sake of, for clarifying, in my classes, I talk about aspects of writing. So I will say which component of linguistics. That way we don't mix the terminology. Aspects are the big pieces of the big areas. Different viewpoints on writing. So if we're talking about linguistics, we'll call them components of linguistics. So aspects is the first layer, and then components is the next. Which components of linguistic are most important? All of them. Which is terrible. They're all equally important. And so having an understanding of all of them is important. One of the most important things to recognize as like a threshold concept for linguistics is recognizing the difference between prescriptive grammar and descriptive grammar, prescriptive linguistics and descriptive linguistics. And this has to do with what I call grammar versus grammar norms. So prescriptive says this is how language should work. And if you're not doing it that way, you should be penalized. And descriptive says, look at these patterns of communication that people have. That's intriguing because when they pattern it this way, it does this, it has this reaction, but when they pattern it this way, it has this reaction. So and then we can take a rhetorical lens and say, depending on which reaction I want from the language, from the audience or the reader, or the communicator, the illocutor, then I will use the different linguistic structure or strategy. So As a threshold concept, understanding the difference between describing language through the different components versus prescribing language, which is based on norms and social expectations. Those are like having that threshold understanding of like, you can think about and analyze language, but you don't have to do it that way every time just because some people say you do. It depends on who the audience is you're trying to target. Because, I like the example of I think it's Reagan when the Berlin Wall came down. He went to he was speaking to Germans, and he says, "Ich bin ein Berliner," which has an article in front of it. The Ein Berliner is a jelly donut. What he meant to say was he was a person of Berlin, like he was trying to show solidarity in that speech, to show that he supported the wall coming down and everything. And if you don't know the history, go look it up. But the bottom line is there was a U.S. president who didn't know how to speak German right, according to prescriptive language. But descriptively, the audience knew what he meant. It's just funny now that he called himself a jelly donut. But in context, everybody knew the heartfelt sentiment that he was trying to communicate. Smiley face. Any thoughts? Okay. What other questions did I get from students? So these were ones that came through Monday that I couldn't get to because I was in the middle of a classroom or prepping for the D&D game. One question I have about college is, what's a good amount of time to spend studying from a textbook per day for a quiz that's in a week? A second question I have is, what's a note-taking strategy you suggest for quizzes? Not the best test taker, and I'm trying to improve on that. These are great questions. Great questions. So what's a good amount of time studying from a textbook? Okay. So as long as it takes is the wrong answer, but it's the easy one. Efficiency of studying is most important. And so it's less about, though you can brute force your way through studying, but there are more efficient ways to do it. And then there's the caveat of like, from a textbook, it depends. And is that the only or primary way that knowledge is being given to you for the quiz you're being given? So there's a couple kind of caveats that have to happen here with this question. So first, from a textbook, if you're doing from a textbook, that can be a challenge. And for those of you who know, I just put out an ebook for my classes this year. And so having students use my textbook has been different. But with the textbook, the challenge is that it is traditional reading. I am looking at a text, I'm trying to gain information from it, and it feels in the moment like a solitary activity. It doesn't have to be, but it feels that way. And so the first thing is be flexible and experimental with how you engage with that text. Most importantly, if you're not a strong reader or not a habitual reader, you have to develop the literacy muscle, for lack of a better term. You can't jump in and go, I'm going to read for 45 minutes straight. My brain's going to do great. Like my brain doesn't do great with that, especially if it's a specialized language being used or in a constant state of learning, like a high cognitive function task, like trying to learn from a textbook in solitary confinement. I do have a video where I talk about the triple pass method as far as reading goes, but this is a time question. So let's keep going to let's think it. So just real quick context, the triple pass method says do fast scan, pick what you can read in 10 minutes, do a fast scan of it in like 4 to 6 seconds per page. As you build, you're going to try and let your brain do a big picture schema of what you're about to read. So you're only kind of looking at the page layout, the headings and subheadings of different sections, and then you're moving on. It's like 4 to 6 seconds, 4 to 6 seconds, 4 to 6 seconds. And you do a scan of the section you're going to try and read in 10 minutes total. That doesn't mean you scan for 10 minutes. You scan for like 40 seconds. Then you do a second slow scan. And so that's like 10 to 12 seconds per page, where you allow yourself to read a little bit more and let words kind of pop out at you, or phrases or starts of sentences, or start the first sentence of each paragraph. And you kind of slow scan through to continue building that schema. So you're cognitively, you do the first one to get a real hazy picture of what the sections are and kind of the general focus of the reading is. Then you go slower and you start filling in those gaps, and it gets a little less hazy. Then you start reading line by line, paragraph by paragraph ish. And that helps your brain indirectly or subconsciously ish start building the context so that when you read a sentence, you have a bigger sense of what it's fitting into, which doesn't happen if you just jump in and start reading. So that's the triple pass method, and that's an efficiency strategy. And it seems like it takes more time, but it's more efficient. So it's more productive time, and it doesn't actually take more time in the long run. And like, even if the worst case scenario was that you scanned twice, it's like maybe a minute and a half to 2 minutes added to a 10-minute reading time. So, but you learn so much better that way. The second thing is don't do 2-hour study sessions, not straight. Use the Pomodoro method. Do 20 to 25 minutes, stop, take a break, get a snack, walk, get your heart rate up again, and then come back. Some cultures have tried to trigger adrenaline spikes right after learning activities by teaching something to young people and then throwing them in cold water. I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just saying that if it helps learning, you have to think about what you do. So say you spend 25 minutes, reading and examining a textbook, and then you do something that spikes your adrenaline hopefully in a healthy way, and not just drinking caffeine. But you go for, if you've got an ice bath or you want to jump in a cold pool or something, maybe that does help to anchor some of the knowledge. It makes it a more memorable experience. There's tons of mnemonics that can make your learning sessions more memorable and that sort of thing. But know that at some point you're going to reach a cognitive fatigue limit for yourself, and that muscle has to have time to develop. So planning for 20 or 30-minute study sessions at a time is better than planning for a 2-hour study session and giving yourself days to sleep on it. Problems that your brain can't solve in the moment will be solved partially subconsciously as you sleep and sometimes that's why weird things show up in our dreams. It's our brain trying to solve problems. So that's a little bit that psychology and cognitive science tells us. Even if you're an expert in that and you want to give me clarifying points, fine, but the basic principles there. Back to the question. So I think that covers that. How long? So a textbook per day for a quiz that's in a week. So how much time spent studying? So for a college course that's 16 weeks long, you shouldn't be spending more than 9 hours a week on that college course unless the course has been designed in an imbalanced way. So, but if that's the only content and you're reading only textbook and the quiz is only on the content in the textbook, if you're in class for 3 hours, you should spend 6 hours out of class. If you do that, you're highly likely to succeed. But if you think of it that way, if that's the only content for that, there's some other factors that might go into play. So setting a specific time to spend studying doesn't quite work in this context. If it's in a week, again, I suggest starting with 30-minute sessions or use the Pomodoro method, 20, 25-minute sessions, take a break. And if you do that 4 days in a row and it's one chapter in a textbook, I'd be really surprised if it took more than that. And that's about 2 hours. The next one has to do with note-taking strategies, the Cornell method. So whether that's for quizzes or not, again, it's not about the assessment. Quizzes and tests are assessments of learning, just like that thing I said about grades. So a note-taking strategy, use the Cornell method. There's tons of videos on YouTube, so that's all I'm going to say. There's a way to set it up that helps you think about summarizing what you're learning, not writing down every little thing. Don't take pictures and then as note-taking because you're not going to remember that. If you need the picture to go and chew on later, that's different, or to process later. That later step is really important. Those are, and then being the last point was not the best test taker, and I'm trying to improve on that. So that's not being a good test taker. That's a specific skill. Taking specific tests is a specific skill. That's why high schools put out like ACT exam courses that are 6 weeks long or whatever, SAT exam courses. That's why there's specialty courses for succeeding at specific tests, because gaming the test is a skill. That being said, if you know your stuff, if you're like, I did all the studying, but then I get to the test and I freak out or it disappears from my brain, we have two issues. One, go watch my video on recognition and recall memory. That's going to help. Check the video on, or the crash course on YouTube about study strategies, but also recognize, and we deal with this a lot at the community college, recognize that test taking anxiety is a real thing, which means you get into an environment where you have not succeeded in the past, and it causes a body response, a stressor response, like an endocrine trigger that starts releasing cortisol into your system because it's a stressful situation. And some of those chemicals that are designed to help you lean into fight or flight and protect yourself shut down certain problem solving portions of the brain, and can inhibit your critical thinking. So then dealing with anxiety and test taking stress, even if you know all this stuff, if that happens, you're basically putting a wall up between your knowledge and what you're in the situation you're in. So you have to be careful. And again, I'm giving the very like condensed form of research. So if I'm a little off on the points and you're an expert, don't judge me. I'm trying to make it palatable. You can talk to disability resources if that's something you think you have. It is possible to get extra time on tests and exams. And most importantly, there's a couple things. If you have test taking anxiety, that's a challenge. If you struggle with tests because of ADHD, that's a different challenge. And so experts in ADHD and test taking say they don't need more time. They need stimulus, not less stimulus. So someone with anxiety needs less stimulus and a calmer environment. Someone with ADHD might need more stimulus. And so it's important to recognize there's a difference in how someone's responding to those environments. So they might need regular reminders of time. So even if you're given normal time, given 10-minute, like, again, it's the same sun that bakes the clay softens the same sun that melts ice hardens clay, whatever that phrase is. But if I'm at the front of the room and we're taking a test and I give 10-minute reminders, hey, it's been 10 minutes, you have 50 minutes left. Hey, it's been 20 minutes, you have 40 minutes left. Someone who's having a hard time focusing is going to be benefited. Someone who has anxiety is going to be get more stressed out. And so the same thing I'm doing is going to have different responses in different students. So you have to recognize who you are and what you need, because different strategies may work better for you. If you are easily distracted and need noise canceling headphones or something like that, but you also need reminders to stay focused on what the test is instead of going into daydreaming mode, like that's more my brain. I don't get stressed in a test taking environment. I get distracted. Other people get anxious and shut down. So, and telling them that they need to hurry up doesn't help. Helping me refocus helps me. I'm like, oh, I was supposed to be doing that. Right. Yeah.
What if the person has ADHD and anxiety?
That's why it's so important to look for how you respond to stressors. And it's always there are ways to get professional help for that, and school supplies resources, like there's a counseling resources, there's disability resources, and it's important that you use all the resources you have available to you to figure that out. Because that does create a challenge. But sometimes the anxiety is connected to, like, the comorbidity with ADHD is sometimes there's the ADHD trigger that started causing the anxiety, the behavior of anxiety. And so we have to figure out which one is the main source. And since ADHD is an internal chemical thing and anxiety is a behavioral response in most cases, though ask a psychologist or counselor for your specific thing. So I'm generalizing. Because of that, it's important to recognize if one is causing the behavior, we have to, you want to adjust the behavior and try and help, but you have to get the right problem solved. And if both are legitimate, like at the same level problems, you need to be having conversations with the people around you, with your professors, with resources on campus so that you succeed, because no one else is going to know that that's the problem you have. And you might not even know that that's the problem you have. You just know, I'm not good at test taking. So you have to really ask people around you, do a self-assessment, do the hard work of figuring out what the real issue is. Not just I'm bad at tests, or I'm bad at math because of tests, or I'm bad at chemistry because of tests, or whatever it is. Because people may have the knowledge but struggle with the practice in context. All right. So that all on that. That was specific to test taking. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Let's see what other questions we have. And because I'm almost out of time on office hours right now, and I'm going to have to go. Okay. So 2 questions for you today is, for today's assignment. What made you decide you wanted to teach English or writing? And second, is it normal for most students to feel pretty lost on their first semester of college? Let's do others focused first. So practical strategy. It is so anyone feels lost in a new environment. Anyone feels Many people will feel uncomfortable in environments that are unfamiliar. And so feeling lost is common in a variety of circumstances. If it's your first day, especially new circumstances, first day on the job, first day at a new school, it's not necessarily just new to college. Even students who have dual enrollment may not be used to the type of college, because they may have had dual enrollment in high school, in a high school environment that is still 80% in person, 20% homework or something close. Whereas college is usually a third or a sixth in person, unless you do all online classes, and a 2/3 or 5/6 homework outside of class. That alone, drastically different. Especially if you're a verbal processor, if you are a social learner, if you are an auditory learner, and there's a whole lot of online text you have to read now. If you're a physical or so you're and learning styles are complicated on the science/pseudoscience realm, but it's good to know if we have proclivities, if we tend to be more practiced in listening and taking in information, reading and taking in information, or discussing and taking in information. And there are tons of research on that are best practices for figuring it out. It is normal, is the short answer. It's normal to feel a little lost in your first week. I tell my students it's okay to get stuck sometimes. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. What you do with that feeling, how you respond to that discomfort, determines your long-term success. Don't stay stuck. Don't stay that way. But there's a lot of new, and it's okay, and it's going to be hard because new is sometimes hard. It doesn't make it bad, and that's a distinction. Like sometimes we do things, they're hard, and we like attach moral connections to it. Like it must be bad because of how difficult this is. And no, sometimes it's just so new that it's hard for you. And then you look at someone who has it down, and you're like, well, they've been practicing that type of thing. So for instance, I had someone who in my class did high school homeschool and grew up homeschooled. Well, that style of learning is a lot closer to the college environment because it's more independently driven, and you have to like, especially if you're being homeschooled by someone who's not an expert in the specific disciplines. It's your job to go study the material, hold yourself accountable to getting assignments done, and that sort of thing. A little bit more than a public school situation where you've got an expert ready and ready to ask questions, and they're in front of you 5 days a week, and so they're accessible. So don't stay stuck. It is normal. Don't let it discourage you. But do the things you need to now in that first week. Make connections with your professors. Reach out, ask basic questions. Connect with your fellow students and that sort of thing. And if you're in my class, I cover some of those strategies, I think, in chapter 2 of my textbook. Don't stay lost. It's okay to feel a little uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you should stay there, and it doesn't make it bad. It just means you've got an area that needs growth. I need to make new social connections on campus. I need to get into a gaming club, go find esports, get into one of the other clubs on campus, like Society for Women Engineers, or the Science Club, or the Math Club, or the Computer Club, or whatever it is, the Fashion Club. Find a place where you can connect, where you can grow together, and keep people around you or build people around you, a support system that will help you grow and not bring you down. The other one was personal. What made me want to teach English in the first place? Well, admittedly, I've always been a reader. I've always been into English. I always liked words. I've been a sassy 10-year-old since probably I was younger than that. I love puns and dad jokes and that kind of thing. I read chapter books at age 7, like second grade. My first chapter book was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I didn't know what chapters were. So I was like jumping around in the book thinking they were short stories. And then I remember being in the back of the car and sharing that with my mom, who was driving at the time at 7. Like, this is a distinct memory. And I was reading like chapter 17 and going, these are the same people that were in this other part of the thing. And and she was, I remember her playfully laughing, going, oh, sweetie, that's how books work. And so then I continued reading, but I ended up reading Lord of the Rings 7 times before I was 13. So, and I got second place in a reading competition in 6th grade. So I've just always been a big reader. And in case you didn't notice, I talk a lot. So I'm a hyperverbal processor. I taught, so the actual motivation, so that's been a thing. In senior year, I got the English Award of Excellence for my school, Trinity High School. But most importantly, as far as the calling to be a professor of writing. So, first I went back to college because I thought it would be wise. And I had, and this is where might be a little uncomfortable for some people, but it's just my story and I'm not pushing it on anybody else. But my story was, that I wanted to do what was good and right as a husband and a father. And I wanted to make sure I did, what I felt was God's plan for me, because that's the best plan in my perspective. And so, as I was reading and praying, a verse came out from, what was first? In Proverbs, it says, I was trying to decide whether I was going to, because I was working construction at the time. I was trying to decide whether I was going to go and like move up into the mountains in Southern California where it was cheaper, buy a land and build a house, because I worked at a block yard and I would get 50% off and all that fun stuff. I thought, I'll do it slow and steady. My family will have a home. I'll be good. Or whether I was supposed to go back to college, because I had 3 years as a performance production major in theater, but I never actually got a degree. I left before completing a degree. So it was like, do I build a house or do I go back to school and kind of add skills to my background? And so I was praying about it, and I make a habit of regularly reading through books of the Bible. So I was in the Old Testament in reading through Proverbs, and it says in Proverbs, I think 24:28 or 28:24, it says, prepare your outside work and make it fit for yourself in the fields, and then build your house. And the principle there is a work principle. It's build a profession that can sustain you. You can live in a tent, you can rent. If you've got a profession that sustains you, you build that so that then you can build a house. If we focus on the house, we don't have enough profession to support being in the house. So I'm like, okay, I need to make myself better and more value, have higher value to the workforce. So I went back to college. As I continued to go, what's the first thing people do when they go back to college? Well, what major should I major in? I didn't want to do theater anymore. It'd been 3 years, and I felt like my mindset had shifted on life, and I still like creative work, but I had shifted my focus. So again, I'm praying about it, and I go, okay. So then, a month later, 2 months later, I decided to read through Daniel in the Old Testament. And in the first chapter, it talks about how all the cool young guys who were taken captive in a land that they were less familiar with in Chaldea, it says that they were taught or learned the literature and language of the Chaldeans. And so for me, like in Southern California, the degree wasn't an English degree. It was at Cal State. It was the literature and writing degree. And so for me, literature and language of the culture I was in, California Chaldean. So my brain just did an associative thing and said, I think that's right. And that's something that makes sense with who I am and how I'm built. And so I decided to go and do that program, and I did it well. And I asked professors, and they said, you should keep going. And so I kept going to a master's and kept going to a PhD. While I was still in bachelor's, I'm like, I was thinking about it. And because people are like, oh, an English degree doesn't really make money. It's like humanities and that kind of thing. And this faces what other people think. But if you look at the numbers, maybe on the first job market search, an English major has a lower income than, say, an engineer. By the fourth job after graduating, English majors come up higher because they have the soft skills necessary to communicate, and they bond people together, and they become team leaders. Even if they don't know anything about engineering, they know how to communicate and translate for people. So those soft skills, or those humanities-based skills, become really important. that being said, that's a side point. The last thing that made me become a professor or a teacher of writing and as a calling was I had started reading the New Testament about 6 months after this. And I was like, okay, but how am I going to make money with an English degree? Because I was still learning this stuff. And everybody asked that, like, what's my major? And is it going to do what I need it to do? Support my family, do the thing. And so I was reading in Mark, and I think it's 634 or 436. And it says that having compassion, Jesus taught them many things. And so that was like, okay, I'm a literature and writing major. I'm supposed to teach. I'm supposed to teach with compassion. So I'm teaching them many things and having compassion. Like that's like my whole motivation and calling for being a professor, in case you didn't know. Cool. I think I'm almost out of time. I'm going to have to do another one of these to answer the rest of the questions. But if you end up coming and looking this, hopefully this was useful and helpful. And so, yeah, I think I'm calling this segment Inquiring Minds. Have a good day.